Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Eric Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show. Hey, welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show.
How you doing, Eric?
I'm doing really good. I went out for an 8-mile run yesterday. Well, Sunday now, and it was awesome. It was super warm. Actually, a little too warm.
Sunday was a great day.
It was getting a little sticky.
Yeah.
And in Minnesota, we get like warm plus maximum humidity.
Yes.
And Sunday felt like a summer day. And then Monday, I took an accidental 2-hour nap, and I was like, I wonder why I'm so tired. It's because I ran 8 miles.
Yep. Yeah, we get the sticky hot weather, which is not amazing because then the next day you get thunderstorms, right? Because that's thunderstorm weather.
Yeah, we're supposed to have storms all week.
Yep. There was a tornado in southern Minnesota. I saw a touchdown. It didn't. It just damaged a farm outbuilding. So luckily, no. I mean, that would be terrible if you're the farmer, but it didn't affect people. No one was hurt, so that's good. Because sometimes, I mean, those tornadoes. The one last summer hit Bemidji, and that was pretty bad.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're running into a tornado season.
Yeah, we've traditionally in the city been somewhat protected from tornadoes because the city gives off a high pressure zone because of all of the concrete.
Yep.
So the city captures a lot of heat, so it deflects a lot of weather.
Yeah. That's what they were saying yesterday, because the warm front was right below the cities. But here in the Twin Cities and above, it was like colder. So it kept the thunderstorms below us. But yeah, still not great if you're in that alley, if you're in the way of those storms. Okay, well, hopefully we don't have to deal with tornadoes. But other than that, I really enjoy Minnesota summers. So looking forward to the nice weather.
Yeah. Get out there and enjoy the weather.
That's right.
Speaking of enjoying the weather, I'm spending some of my time indoors game jamming. The Game.Dev.js jam is on.
Yeah.
Started on Monday.
What are you building?
We're doing a tower defense game where the theme is machines, where you take different parts and you build your towers like upgrades by doing Diablo-esque inventory management.
Cool.
Where you attach these machine parts to the tower to like upgrade it and whatnot.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah, so it's not just like you have a tower that does a thing. You have like your base, like this is your base tower, and it has like a basic defense, but then you can create like multiple things it can do based on different upgrades.
That's right. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I've got a playtester for you. My son loves tower defense games. He plays them on the browser and web games, so he'd be a good test case for you.
I'm going to try to bring it to the IGDA Twin Cities event.
Yeah.
On Wednesday. But if you're in the Twin Cities, you can come hang out and play it maybe.
Ooh, that'll be
Depends
fun.
on whether or not it's in a playable state.
Yeah. Or y'all can come to Minibar because me and Eric will both be there. Because you're going to be doing the IGDA thing there too, right?
I will be.
Cool.
I will be running. Well, I'll be helping to run the show. I will not be running the show.
Yep. Well, as I've said before, Minibar is probably one of my favorite local events now. It's something
kind of like the only tech conference left after COVID.
Yep, and luckily it's one of the best ones. So I'm glad.
It's great.
Glad it's still going on.
Yeah, it's definitely well worth your time and money.
That's right. Cool. So I've just been working on a little bit of keep track of my games, but mostly just working on my next course because that deadline is coming up faster than I wish it was.
Now the treadmill advances.
Yep. That's right. Should we get into the news for the week of April 6th?
We should.
All right. Well, first up, Bun did have yet another minor release, which is pretty typical for them, but there was some cool notable changes in this release. So this is Bun 1.3.12. The main thing is that they introduced a new Bun.WebView, which is a way to do headless browser automation within Bun. natively. So that's pretty cool.
That is pretty slick.
Yeah.
I think, traditionally I would have used like Puppeteer.
Right.
Or if you're doing testing, you might be doing Playwright, which I think wraps Puppeteer. But this is pretty cool where it just comes out of the box. It's pretty neat.
Yeah. So if you need to, rather than like, this is probably not for a testing use case, but more like I need to write a script that like uses the browser to do some automation. I remember that there's a cool service called Scraping Bee, I think it is, which is like a headless browser automation for doing scraping, but it's like as a service. So you can just spin up browsers to do scraping tasks for you and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something, Bun.WebView is a way to just kind of do it within a single Bun script, which is kind of cool.
They also added a way to render Markdown in the terminal
Yeah.
just by doing Bun my Markdown file, and it looks dope.
It looks really nice. I was joking with you, like, what case would you use this feature? I guess if you live in the terminal your whole life, I think this is actually a pretty cool feature. So since you're a NeoVim dandy, like you'd probably love this type of feature.
Yes, actually, this would be great if honestly, I could see me using this to build like a little NeoVim plugin to like preview a Markdown file, or even just if I wanted to read it in a more friendly way. But they had shown an example of it like using ANSI to like create something that looks like it would be rendered in HTML, like how it would be rendered.
Yeah.
So it's actually very nice looking.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I think people who enjoy terminal UIs and stuff will love that feature.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up, we have a pretty, this one kind of hit the web by storm, I would say, because I heard about it in the group chat and then I checked it out. This, of course, we're talking about Claude Mythos, the new preview. So there's a few things, I guess, to talk about. First, if you're not familiar with the Mythos model, this is a new model by Anthropic. So it is the successor to Opus, right, which is their top reasoning model that they have right now. Mythos apparently is so good that they are not releasing it generally right now because it turns out that when you teach a model how to fix vulnerabilities, it also gets really good at exploiting vulnerabilities. And the Anthropic Red Team blog has a pretty detailed blog post on some of the capabilities that they've seen in Claude Mythos, and it's actually kind of scary.
Yeah, I think I have two things. One, my skepticism meter is at like 4 million, like out of however many, because big if true, but we don't have any like prompts. We don't have any we just have hearsay, and they submitted patches. So, but big if true. Also, if true, there's a common phrase which is 3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. So the fact that they're planning on giving limited access to groups of people means that this will be inevitably exploited early.
Yep.
Any kind of access to something this like radioactive is going to be dangerous.
And let's just say that Anthropic's track record lately hasn't been squeaky clean, has it?
That's not. So I added a couple videos here to the show notes. Ed from Low Level Learning has a really good video on Claude Mythos. And then Hank Green actually has a great video as well, especially coming from like a layperson's perspective.
I'm definitely 2 minds about it because I almost want to be like, you know what, put this back into the box and just don't let it out, because I think this is going to have a very huge impact on the software landscape. And they sort of admit to this too. It's because they say that like during the initial phase, it's going to be really, really tumultuous because it's probably going to benefit attackers more than defenders. But once we reach a state of what they call security equilibrium, then it's going to benefit defenders more than attackers. But I'm also like, well, but like you're admitting that there's going to be this period of time where there's probably going to be lots of breaches and like vulnerabilities and things like that. So, I mean, I get that they want to release it to a limited group, but like you said, how long until there's a headline where Claude Mythos preview is leaked? Now you'll have the list of vulnerabilities that you could exploit.
You pwn someone in one of these organizations.
Right.
You have access to their box.
Yeah. Anyway, so there's definitely more to talk about there, but I think that these videos will give you a good give you a good overview.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up, still in the AI space. You've probably heard about Cursor. Cursor, for the longest time, Cursor 1 and 2 was built on top of VS Code, like the Monaco editor. And that had served them well for a long time. Obviously, they have a high valuation. But for Cursor 3, they are betting on something different. This is from the new stack, and the headline is that the IDE is now a fallback, not the default. So just quoting from the article, Cursor 3 is built from scratch under the codename Glass, which makes an agent management console the primary interface and pushes the traditional IDE to a secondary surface. Engineers can still write code in it, but the product's design assumes they will spend most of their time dispatching agents, reviewing output, and deciding which ships. The prompt box sits where the file tree used to be. So I have a few thoughts on this, and I'd be interested to hear what you think. So first of all, I think that this is a great strategic decision for them. And the reason that I say that is because before, what was really differentiated Cursor from like VS Code, right? Because we've talked about this before. VS Code, market leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anything that Cursor did that built on top of VS Code could just slurp it into the main product, right?
Right. Yeah, they were competing theoretically on DX, right?
Yes,
like
exactly.
that was the at least in the beginning.
Yep.
That was their wedge.
Yep. So what do you do if that's the case? Because that is not a way to compete. You're never going to win if that's your strategy, right? But so it was good enough to serve them initially, right? So they were able to prove out that, hey, maybe this agent thing is like makes sense, and we were able to build all the tools that we need to work with agents. But now it's time to make like a pretty big strategic shift, which is we're just going to bet that this is going to be the future, that we're not going to be primarily writing code as developers. We're going to be autonomous machine developers. We are managing autonomous machines. They're betting on that future. So I think it's a great strategic decision for them. However, it's a really big bet. So I don't know. I don't know if it's going to end up being a good business decision. You read all this analysis that there's probably an AI bubble in effect right now, and it's probably going to come crashing down pretty soon, which is not a nice thing to think about. But the reality of where the math is right now, where capital is flowing, is like it's like in a little circle. Like they're basically IOUs to all these big companies. Like NVIDIA's like, oh, you're going to buy all these GPUs? Cool. You prepay for them. By the way, we're going to release new GPUs every like 1 year. And so all the GPUs that you previously bought are now defunct. So, and then companies are going, well, wait a minute. Maybe I don't want to buy GPUs so quickly.
Yeah, there's a really good infographic video that I'll include here, which explains the kind of the circular money path where pretty soon someone's going to be left holding the bag.
Yep. This is like a hot potato, right?
Yeah. So who's it going to be?
So
because none of these companies still are turning a profit, by the way.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the future that Cursor is betting on. And so their fate is tied to that, right? So who knows how that is going to go? I mean, it doesn't look good. That's what I can say.
Yeah. I agree. From a strategy perspective, they're trying to compete in a place that's different from their main competitor. Yes, so they don't want to compete in the same space.
Microsoft, VS Code, Visual Studio, they're not going to do that, right? Because they do have the majority of the market. People are going to get upset if the next version of VS Code looks like that, right?
I could see this being a wrong bet for Cursor for another reason, and that's people like the DX in Cursor. Right. And this might actually turn off their loyal users.
That'll be interesting.
Because they completely changed how you use the software.
Yep. I mean, and that's one of the things with strategy in general, right? Is like you have to say no to something. Like you have to make a decision, and that is going to split people. Like you can't be middle of the road strategy. Like that is not a strategy. You have to be able to say no, and you have to be able to say yes to something. And so they're saying no to that DX. They're saying, nope, we're not doing that DX. So you don't like it, there's plenty of other people to go to, right? But if you're with us with this new vision of this future, here's where we're going. You can come with us, or you can stay here if you want to, right? Like that's what they're saying, right? So, and I think that's why it's a good strategic decision. Whether or not it's a good business decision remains to be seen.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. I certainly would be, I would certainly be biting my nails if I were in the hot seat there.
All right, cool. You got some news for some other meta frameworks here.
Yeah. We have Ember.js. They are now using Vite by default. Vite is winning, it seems like, at least for now. So Chris Manson posts on Blue Sky. They want to hear some feedback and any suggestions they have. But Ember is now using Vite by default. So, all of that good ecosystem goodness comes with. So if you're an Ember dev or you're still maintaining Ember projects, this might be a thing to take a look at.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
Next up, SvelteKit 2.56 drops. And the big headliner here is TypeScript 6 support. Hey. Next up, VoidZero announces that they have made the Angular compiler faster in coordination with the Angular team. They've done this with some AI coding agents under the guidance of some experienced engineers, but they went through and found all of the problems in a 2-month collaborative development experiment with Claude Code and Codex to added first-class Vite support with the full HMR, which is huge.
That's cool.
Is built with the VoidZero OXC tool chain, which powers Vite 8, and then also fully supports Angular's primitives. So this one caveat there is it doesn't support any of Angular's cross-file optimization or template type checking. That's okay. But at the end of this, they had a 6.5 times faster Angular CLI, which is bonkers. And this is 20 times faster than Webpack, which is also bonkers.
That's pretty cool. I mean, and I think right now it's still like an experimental thing, right? Like this is not rolled out or anything.
Right. And if you want to try this out, you can do this with the @oxc-angular/Vite package. And then you have a first-class Angular plugin. So it's Angular open banana configuration, and you're off to the races.
Cool. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's pretty slick.
Think you might try that at work, maybe?
But definitely. We wait a long time for our builds. And it makes sense because, we have a complicated build. It makes sense that we wait for it. And it's under the hood. For a long time, it was using Webpack. So, and there's only so fast that Webpack can go.
Yep. Well, as long as your build doesn't depend on some of those edge cases or those cases where it doesn't work, then maybe you'll find some luck with it. That'd be cool.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. There's a couple major releases as far as frameworks go. Docusaurus 3.10 dropped. This has some cool stuff. So first of all, obviously we've been talking lots and lots about supply chain security. So the new release uses trusted publishing, has a CI scanner, and includes recommendations for security. We've got this new feature called Docusaurus Faster, which I believe is like a new build pipeline that they have, and that's going to be the new default in Docusaurus 4. Big breaking changes, though, is strict MDX. So before you could create an MD file with like an MD file extension, and it could be an MDX file. And an MDX file is one where you can put like React components and syntax in it. But they're going to be introducing strict MDX. So only MDX files will be treated as MDX. And within that, there's still some strict rules about what you can do. So that is going to be a breaking change. But the other cool thing is that they do have a new stable storage API. You can do local storage, for example, which is pretty cool. And then they've also have an experimental version control system API.
Yeah. And this seems like a thing that'll be super useful too. Hey, maybe this will be in the future. I don't know. They don't really talk about this, but it'd be useful to be like, what are the previous versions of this page? Like, I want to see API version, old for whatever.
Yes. And I guess to be clear, this is like local VCS, so like version control. So Git by default, but like you'd be able to integrate it with like SVN or Mercurial or even like a CMS or any other external system. So I would assume that includes like GitHub, but I don't think that GitHub is out of the box there. But you get like a first class API to actually work with it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So this is mostly in preparation for Docusaurus 4. And Yeah, the last release was 3.9, and that was in September. So it's been definitely a few months. So some cool news if you're in the Docusaurus ecosystem, which we are. So that's pretty neat. Next up, Storybook 10.3. And in this one, some of the headliners are that they have a new MCP server for React. So you can use the MCP server to help you write like stories that involve React components. They've got a huge overhaul for accessibility with hundreds of issues fixed, which that's pretty cool. They have a new CLI overhaul, new viewports and Zoom UI, some new onboarding guides, and for TypeScript developers, they have new type-safe component story format factories for Vue, Angular, and web components. And so there's definitely a lot in here, as they usually have in each release. So I would say go take a look. But it looks like it makes it a lot easier to create type-safe component stories and stuff. So that's pretty cool.
All right, moving on to Library Watch.
Cool. So, internationalization is always a pain point. And I always tell people, if you didn't plan on internationalization, you should plan on rewriting your app because
yes,
it affects your architecture so much. But usually you're sort of tied into how your framework or your vendor or whatever does internationalization. And so I saw this on Reddit, but this person said, hey, I don't like that. We should just have a agnostic, like a platform and vendor agnostic way of doing type-safe internationalization for any kind of TypeScript project. Doesn't matter if you're using React or Next.js or SvelteKit or whatever. So this is called Better Translate. And I sort of like this sort of a new naming convention where people are creating like this better dash whatever.
Better off.
Yeah, exactly. So this is Better Translate. And like I said, it's type-safe internationalization for any TypeScript project with any meta framework. So you can take your internationalization logic, take it with you to whatever framework you're using.
And I did make a Better Auth joke there, but I don't think these folks are affiliated with Better Auth at all.
No, so they are not.
So
Yep.
the Better Dash brand is not one company.
Yeah. Better watch out. Get it? You don't want to cease and desist about that. Okay. Next up, there's tiny-tts. So TTS stands for text-to-speech. This is pretty cool. So usually with a text-to-speech, you need some kind of trained model with the dictionary, pronunciation guide, all that kind of stuff. And if you've used stuff like 11 Labs before, which is like generative text-to-speech, obviously that's like a hosted service. So this is a zero dependency TypeScript library. Actually, you can install it with Python, so it's native to Python, but it also has a Node.js native package. No dependencies, no Python needed. It's CPU only text-to-speech, and it uses a very small distilled model using ONNX or Onyx, which is part of a Qualcomm Snapdragon, I think, a CPU architecture or whatever. It's basically a type of model format, and it's only 3.4 megabytes, so very, very small. Whereas like normally these models could be gigabytes. And obviously, larger models have more capabilities. This is English only, but it's pretty cool. Like you could, this is small enough where you could use it on like a Raspberry Pi or like an edge device or a device that has no GPU, right? And you could do text to speech with it, which is kind of cool. And it's all in TypeScript.
Super interested now. I'm gonna play the sample they have for tiny-tts to see what it sounds like.
The weather is nice today, and I feel very relaxed.
It's pretty robotic, but if you need text-to-speech in a small amount, I think this would be pretty... It's better than what... Remember Microsoft Sam?
The weather is nice today.
Like, it sounded like a speak and spell. It kind of sounds like a speak and spell. This next one's pretty slick. There's a new library called Pagyra? Pagyra? JS?
Pagyra? I don't know. Pagyra. I feel like Pagyra is a good one.
Pagyra? But this is super cool. It'll take HTML and produce a PDF from it, which is dope. Because, most of the time, like, I'll admit to this, I just say, throw a print CSS on it and let Chrome handle it.
Yep.
And pop a native print PDF dialog.
Exactly.
But this will do HTML to PDF in pure TypeScript, which is dope. And I pulled up their little playground. Chef's kiss good. This is so good.
Yeah, the playground is super cool. You just modify the HTML on the left side and you get a PDF on the right side.
Yeah, and it looks cool. Like if you need to do any kind of like document generation, this might be a thing to look at.
Yeah.
Ironically, PDF is the document of record for governments, and it is objectively the worst document type for pulling data out of.
That's right. And we've talked about some newer PDF libraries recently, too. I think we did a library watch on tiny-tts was one of them, and also like a tiny word or tiny doc, which is like for docx files. But most of those are programmatic. Like you can build a PDF file with pure TypeScript programmatically and you get a TypeScript, or you get a PDF file. With this, you take your HTML and you get a PDF file, which I think is a much more natural way to do it, which is pretty cool.
Awesome. Next up, I have a library from Sung Kim called PayKit, which is a billing framework for TypeScript to define plans in code, sync with Stripe, gate features, track usage. It's open source and runs in your app. And you can take a look at their website at paykit.sh and take a look at their code. Again, this is finance code. This might be a good thing to take a very close look at before you integrate with your project. I have not used this, so, buyer beware. But their code looks super attractive. So you can define plans in TypeScript. For example, if you got like some sort of SaaS product, you're like, oh, I want to define my free plan, my pro plan, and I want to define how to interact with Stripe. I want to interact with another payment provider. They can do it in a type-safe TypeScript way, which seems really cool.
That is cool. It looks like it's dependent on Stripe, but it does look like that's a separate package under paykit.js/Stripe. So maybe there's going to be a way to integrate with different payment providers or merchants of record in the future. Because, this is something that I would be interested maybe in taking a look at, but I'm not going to be using Stripe for my app. So, but this is pretty cool.
Yeah, super slick. Next, I have another utility from Anthony Fu, who has been on the warpath of like building cool stuff. The tsnapi is a snapshot testing utility for public library maintainers. So one of the biggest problems that I have is it's really easy in TypeScript to accidentally make a breaking change completely unintended, like not on purpose. Like it's also easy to make breaking changes on purpose, but it's also really easy to make breaking changes not on purpose. So what this will do is it'll help you prevent unintended breaking changes on your public type API signatures. So this is a pretty cool tool. It's at github.com /tsnapi. So go check that out.
Love it. Time for some community highlights.
Community highlights. The first one I've got is if you've been under a rock for the last year, or you haven't listened to our What's New in JavaScript episodes, there's a great post by the Frontend Masters team about all of the things you missed this year. It's pretty thorough. There's a ton of stuff in here. It includes a lot of just the base level JavaScript, but it also includes a lot of the frameworks, like the big runtimes, like the big news that happened with Vite and Svelte and Node and Bun and Dino, all of those good things. So if you want a huge summary post of all of the things that happened in the last year, definitely check that out.
Yeah, I think this is a great blog post to send people to be like, well, if you haven't been listening to the show, read this first, then start listening.
Yeah,
you'll have all the context you need to continue listening from today onwards.
And I did a quick scan. I think we've covered almost everything in this blog post in the last year.
Cool. Next up, this is from a previous person that we've highlighted on the community highlights, Christian Cekrem. And this is Parse Don't Validate in a language that doesn't want you to. So Christian works with Elm mostly and other functional languages. But this blog post is really interesting because he talks about how it's different in TypeScript, like branded types, which is a way to do nominal typing to say I only accept this, this type and nothing else, is a little bit awkward to do in TypeScript, right? Because you have to create what's called a branded type. You have to create a unique symbol, and then you have to intersect that with, whatever type you want it to represent. And so he goes into a really nice example of how do you validate a user, right? Because normally the way that we write code, especially in TypeScript, and I would even say in C# and stuff like that, is that you validate the user and then you just pass the user object, up through the stack, right? So code that is upstream of the validation code doesn't usually revalidate it because it just assumes that it's been validated. But why do that, right? Like when you parse something, you're doing a validation innately, and you maintain the type information. And so rather than pass a user up the stack, you would pass a valid user, right? And that is something that you can do much easier in languages like Elm or F# than you can do in TypeScript. And there is a way to do it. Obviously, you can create these branded types, but it requires a little bit more work. And so Christian goes into some of that detail of like, here's how to get this to work. Here's why it's a great idea, because you can reuse type information. You can guarantee that these function signatures are accepting something that's already been validated, right? So rather than assuming that stuff is a string, you actually want an email or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can be much more specific. And this also helps you write more safety critical code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At the end, they talk about like there are ways to make this like less error prone by using things like Zod or Valibot or pick your favorite runtime type validator. But kind of the punchline is that a thing is not a thing in TypeScript until you've parsed it.
Yes.
Because the types evaporate. Like you have to resist the temptation to type assert your way out of a problem.
Yep.
You do need to parse it. So he makes a good point here that this is just an easy foot gun in TypeScript. And arguably that's not necessarily what TypeScript is trying to solve. It might be nice. I think that you noted this. It might be nicer to have better sugar for this kind of nominal type without having to reach for a library like Zod or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, my proposal is like we already have unique symbol, which is actual keywords in TypeScript, right? That give you a unique symbol type. Why don't we have like unique type or type unique or some sort of unique modifier to a type alias where it just does the branding for you? So I could say unique type email equals string, and bam, I've got a branded email type, right? That is a string, but it's a email, right? That I can then pass around, and TypeScript understands that you should only pass email types and not string types. Now, I don't know if that's really going to be possible because of the way that it does like implicit typing and things like that. But I can dream, right? It would be cool to represent branded types in some first-class way in TypeScript.
Yeah, and I think Zod also has a dot brand, which will do some of this sugar for you. But you know, if we're doing this like symbol intersection to create branded types, it would be kind of nice if there was just the thing where we had sugar for it. And because like if you're not familiar with branded types, you might look at that code and be like, what is that doing? You know, because it looks kind of odd, right? Because you're doing like, say I have type email, I'm doing string and this brand, you know, I'm doing this type intersection of this odd thing to make it nominal.
Yes.
Might be nice to have sugar for it.
It would be cool. All right. From the folks over at Encore, they have a blog post titled What We Learned Building a Rust Runtime for TypeScript. And this is a long engineering blog post. It's a 15-minute read, so we're not going to go into everything, but it's pretty interesting. So Encore is a Go framework with a Go runtime, Go CLI, a Go parser, and a Go compiler. And they said that when we decided to support TypeScript, the straightforward choice would have been to write the runtime in TypeScript too, or extend the Go runtime with some kind of bridge. But we ended up writing a new runtime from scratch in Rust. And there were two reasons for this, and they go into what those reasons are. And they say 2 years and 67,000 lines later, the runtime handles the full HTTP request lifecycle, routing, request parsing, validation, response serialization, database connection pooling and querying, pub sub across 3 cloud providers, distributed tracing, metrics collection, object storage, caching, and an API gateway. The TypeScript code your application runs is the business logic, and everything underneath it is Rust. And so this post walks through the decisions that got us here, the problems that weren't obvious going in, and what we do differently. So I think it's definitely well worth a read.
And the punchline here is they don't support the full complexity of TypeScript type system, which I think is a losing battle if you wanted that as a goal, because I think you're always going to be behind the canonical source of truth in Microsoft because there's no TypeScript spec other than the official TypeScript compiler. So there's no like language spec, as it were.
Right.
So what they wound up doing is they used the SWC TypeScript parser to build the AST, and then they did, they did their normal language design thing from there, which makes it, you can't see, but I'm going to do air quotes and say a curse word, a four-letter word called easy. It made it 2 years later easy to do something like this. But that's kind of the technical how-to there, if I were to sum it up in a real brief.
Well, and I think we've seen this pattern play out a few times now, because in the last episode we talked about Parry.ts, which is a way to compile TypeScript to native UI framework code, and they do the same thing at first, which is to use SWC for parsing, and then they take that and they create LLVM optimized code. So I think we're kind of seeing this pattern play out a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes in the future. All right, next up from Peter Kroner, we have a video on the weak map subtype memory leak trap with TypeScript. So I'm not going to assume that everybody knows what strong maps and weak maps are. And actually, Eric, you're probably a better person to explain what the heck is a weak map.
Yeah, so weak map is a way of, say you want to hold on to things, but you don't want that to block garbage collection. So you might have a reference to something, and in a weak map, you can only ever use references as keys. So if you don't have the reference, you don't have the reference to look it up. But what could happen in a weak map is you say, okay, I have a reference as a key. I want to look up a value. At any time, that value could be garbage collected. So that value might not be there. So you're not guaranteed that value will be around. But it's basically a weak reference so that it can be garbage collected. The idea is to not leak memory.
Yes. So, and that's basically what he's going to be talking about, is that you can run into a trap where you might type something as a weak map, but it actually will have a memory leak, just because of the way that the structural typing works in TypeScript. And so I think if you want to learn about the details of how to deal with that, this is a 10-minute video, and he goes into a lot of detail into how to avoid it.
Yeah, and certainly if you're doing weak maps, that's definitely like you're on a more advanced topic and you're really trying to squeeze performance out of what you're doing, and not, potentially you're dealing with large things in memory that you want to like make sure they get collected. So this might be a thing, especially if you're doing like games, you're doing images, you're doing stuff like this where they're quite large, and potentially you want to have a weak map way of holding on to them and not using a normal map and doing your own like heuristic for clearing out your own map, or making sure you have to remember a weak map is a solution for this.
Yeah.
Next, I have a blog post from Schalk Neethling about TypeScript 6 and CSS side effect imports. What changed and how to fix it. I actually just ran into this. So a lot of times you want to just import styles.css. This is a very common way of making sure that your bundler yoinks the CSS and puts it into whatever file you're rendering in your bundler. But TypeScript recently will say, hey, I can't find this module or type declarations for the side effect only import of styles.css. So that's, again, when you do like the import file and you're not like pulling a token out of it, that is the only thing that can be happening there is a side effect, right? You're intending to make a side effect happen. So now there is a way. Well, the way I fix it is I just do a d.ts file. A lot of times I do like files.d.ts, and you can do declare module wildcard.css,
right,
and then do however you want to do it.
Yeah.
Certainly that is one way to do it. In Vite, you can do this with the Vite emv.dts and put your things in there. You could also, in the ts config, and set no unchecked side effect imports to false in your ts config to restore the previous behavior. This might be a mistake. It's probably better to explicitly need to configure it on a per file basis, because otherwise you could typo a path and your bundler will just silently ignore it, potentially. In fact, it certainly does a lot of the time for things. Or you might accidentally include a file that you didn't mean to because of autocomplete, and your bundler dutifully does something with it that you didn't intend. So I think the right way to do this is to not turn off the safety in TypeScript, but to explicitly do like an ambient module declaration in the d.ts file or use the Vite way of doing it.
I think you would turn that flag on if you were doing some kind of migration, but you had a lot of these statements and you, for some reason, just couldn't go update them or something like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good reason to do that. But I thought this was pretty salient because I actually ran into this because I spun up my first TypeScript 6 project from scratch.
Yeah.
Literally for a game jam.
That's awesome.
And next up, I have a video from the Effect team talking about how they went and added TypeScript Go and the Effect LSP, how they got those to work together. Because currently there isn't a way in the new TypeScript Go compiler to build like plugins into the language. So this is a technical video, 45 minutes long, about how they did it. So how they plumbed into the TSGo environment and got their Effect. So Effect.ts is this, I would call it a framework of writing TypeScript that makes it even safer than, and it's a little hardcore, but it makes it even safer in terms of like errors and predictable software.
Right.
But there's a whole like language server plugin for Effect that you might want to use if you're using Effect. So they talk about how they got this to work and how you might be able to get it to work. And they talk about features and the performance of this. So it's pretty cool. And it might be something, I'm sure that the TypeScript team and these folks have reached out to each other, but this is very interesting for like the future of doing like dev tooling with compiler plugins in the Go code base.
Yeah, that's really cool. Next up, from the Railway Engineering blog, we've got one on moving Railway's front end off Next.js. So they were using Next.js with the older Pages router, which at this point is like the legacy way of doing routing. The new one is to use the app router. But they're basically saying, well, our Next.js builds were taking like 10 minutes in CI in our pipelines, and we ship faster than that. And so that was a big bottleneck for them. And by the way, we hardly use any server-side features. So I think that is sort of the key thing I would take away from this post is that, Next.js is a server-side framework, right? So it's very much server-oriented first. And especially the app router, like everything is a RSC, a React server component by default. And most of their code, 99% of it, is all client-side code. And this is actually very similar to like my app right now, where pretty much the entire front end, it's all client-side. And so Next.js would not be a great fit for that. Definitely can do it, but they go into some of the details of like, they had to work around a bunch of things. The routing specifically was kind of a pain point for them with layouts. And so they moved to just plain old Vite and TanStack router. So this is kind of similar to my setup where I have RSPack and React router. But at some point, I'm going to swap that out for Vite, right? So I'll have a Vite and React router setup. And I think this is kind of a cool post that just kind of goes into some of the details about their decision making and what they ended up with. And it's much faster. Their builds are like 2 minutes now. So that's 5 times faster builds now with just plain Vite and TanStack router. So that's pretty cool. All right. And then another engineering post. This is from Prisma, who you know is from our ORM'd and dangerous episode. This is a ORM for TypeScript. But you can do fully end-to-end type-safe MongoDB with TypeScript now in Prisma Next. So this blog post goes into how you can do type-safe document collections and operations and all sorts of stuff, and how they built that into the next version of Prisma. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is pretty awesome. I think if I need to do Mongo, I think this might be the way I do it in the future. I've only ever had very sad experiences with Mongo because of the loosey-goosiness of it. It's like at first it seems like a really great idea. Just whatever, man. Just throw whatever in there. But then, 10 years later, the whatever man documents really start to hurt.
This next blog post is from community member James Sumners, and it's kind of a spicy take on open source and security. So he talked about this, and this relates to Mythos, right? So, and this came out actually before Mythos preview was released, so it'll be interesting to see what James says now. But there has been like a huge influx of LLM generated, it seems like, security vulnerabilities, and those are in air quotes, on open source projects. And some of these maintainers are saying, well, a lot of them are like trash reports. Like if you pass object.prototype to the set foo on object function, it will set object.prototype.foo, and that's prototype pollution. So what? Like obviously we know that. It's not like a real vulnerability. So James has an interesting take where he's saying like we should just let the security vulnerabilities, the legitimate ones, just be out in the open for anyone to see. And he's saying like as a maintainer of open source code, in my experience, it's nothing more than a game people are playing for some sort of clout or reward. Very, very rarely do people show up with a new vulnerability report with a remediation or are even willing to produce a remediation. Their sole goal is to get a CVE issued with their name attached to it. And to accomplish that goal, they leverage any responsible disclosure process put in place by project maintainers. And so this doesn't benefit. It don't like they're doing it for their own benefit. They're not actually trying to benefit the project. And so that's kind of what happened with Log4Shell too, because it got reported to the maintainer and then it was up to him to like fix it. All these companies are like, they're not willing to put in the work. Like they'll report a vulnerability, but then they won't put in the work to fix it. You know, his hot take is maintainers should just leave them open, because if companies really want to have the security vulnerabilities fixed, they should invest in supporting the projects, not trying to rely on this free labor thing. And I think this is kind of an interesting take, and I don't know what the answer is here, but like I said, I think that something like Mythos is really going to be a forcing function here, because if it's able to exploit your open source library, like who's going to be responsible for that? Like either we're going to need to see some more formal investment or protection of open source libraries that are core to our infrastructure, or something. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, this is definitely like a chaos reigns take.
Yeah.
Now, I think this would be very bad, but I do hear the problems, and I do see the problems here, because there's definitely the incentives are stacked against maintainers, and maintainers have limited amount of time and funding, or both, to take care of these things. So, you know, we have these incentives that are just, you know, completely misaligned and ripe for exploitation.
Yeah, I mean,
like in all meanings of that.
I think the number one thing I agree with in this post is no one publishes open code under a license with any guarantees of anything, much less their personal time and effort, simply because there's a bug in the code. If anything, the licenses guarantee the code is probably broken. You know?
Yeah. Spicy take for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's right, and that companies can't be like treating open source maintainers as if they owe like this work to them.
100%.
I do not think that is fair.
No, and certainly there are folks acting in bad faith out there.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say I wouldn't know what the percentage would be, but I'm sure that they exist, and I know they exist because of people I've talked to, and that just sucks.
Yep. And I don't know what the answer is, but it's not going to be pretty, I think, is kind of my takeaway from a lot of this.
It's kind of like the train is heading off the rails. We can all see it happening, but we don't know how to stop the train.
Well, we kind of know how to stop the train, but the train has a mind of its own and is just going.
It's just going.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of inertia behind the train.
That's right. So for the bleed of the week, I chose one that isn't necessarily funny, okay? Because sometimes we got to get serious, all right? So this bleat is from Gabby, fullmoon.id on Blue Sky. Type systems don't slow you down. Understanding the types is the whole problem. Types don't get in the way of doing the job because they are the job. And I like this take because I have the same feeling of like, types help you think about your code more deeply. Like part of the problem with writing a JavaScript app is like the objects can be anything, right? So it's sort of freeing in that liberating sense of like, I don't need to worry about types until you need to worry about types, right? Like especially at runtime. And by thinking about types up front, it helps you model your domain a lot better. So this is something that like is sort of natural for like backend developers and statically typed languages like C# and Java. Like we're thinking about the types of our domain and the types of our models and things like that. But JavaScript developers, they can get away with like not thinking about that. And so I do think that some of the like sentiment against TypeScript, like the negative sentiment, is sort of people like, I don't want to think about types. Like, why are you making me think about types? But I almost think it's like this is not something you want to do, but something you need to do. And that's what TypeScript brings that to the forefront. Oh, for sure, there are cases where it's like, I don't care. Like, it's fine. I'm just writing a script. I do not need to worry about types really. But I think for any kind of user-facing production type of app, like, I think you do need to think about types.
So I said this to you offline, but I think it kind of applies here a little bit, is computation is for computers. Problems are for people. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tattoo that on somewhere. Some place on my body is going to have that tattooed on. But I think it's applicable here because the types are there to help you understand the problem.
Right.
And model the problem. And those are for people.
Yes. I mean, yeah, thinking about types makes you think about the problem you're trying to solve, right? So I'm sure there are people who don't like that idea of like facing the problem they're actually trying to solve. Like either they think that they know better or they don't want to deal with it or whatever. You definitely run into that type of personality in the programming space. But I think that types are super helpful for me to like understand what the heck I'm building. So, all right. Do you have some cool links for us?
I do have some cool links. I have something completely useless, but very entertaining to watch. I don't know. Are you familiar with the sand simulations? Like these
Not
where
really,
you
no.
like click and you drop like little sand. And it's kind of like if you've ever played Lemmings, where you blow up the terrain and the sand, like things flow down. It's kind of like Lemmings. There was a real like dearth of sand simulations in the like early aughts on the web where you could play. But this person made a real-time sand simulation in SQL, which is arguably the hardest way to do it, which I thought was really cool. And if you would like to see how they did it, I thought it was really interesting.
That's pretty funny.
Because if you presented me that prompt and said, hey, Eric, go make a sand simulation in SQL, I would not know how I'd start. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was pretty neat. There was another link I have, which is a video that was thought-provoking about building your own programming language from scratch. And this is from a YouTuber called Code Guild, and they're building their own programming language called Mine, which is kind of funny. It's Mine language. But they're doing it in TypeScript. They're building their own programming language in TypeScript. And they go through their whole thesis of why they're doing that. And I thought it was very interesting. It mostly boils down to like a programming language determines how you think about a problem and how you shape your solution. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that is pretty neat. We'll have to watch that. And once it's a little bit more stable, we can talk more about it. That's pretty cool. I had a couple links. One is from the creator of Lit, as in Lit HTML elements. He's working on a new programming language in the same vein called Xena. What's cool about Xena is that it's inspired by TypeScript. So it basically, if you know TypeScript, you will know Xena. And the elevator pitch here is that Xena is a statically typed programming language that compiles to WebAssembly GC. It combines a familiar TypeScript-like syntax with a sound type system, ! I would say, zero and low-cost abstractions, and modern language features, all designed for ahead-of-time compilation to compact high-performance WASM binaries. Now, that's a lot of words and a lot of jargon and stuff, but we have talked about all this type of stuff in, like, what's the difference between JIT and AOT, which is ahead of time? What's the difference? Like, we've talked with David from Archetype on, like, why doesn't TypeScript have a sound type system? We've talked about all these modern language features, which TypeScript provides, like nominal types. So literally, we're just talking about this. Their syntax for branded types is distinct type. So that's the keyword. So instead of I said unique type, theirs is distinct type. But that lets you create a nominal type alias. And then we've talked about WebAssembly and WASM, right? So I think this is pretty interesting. You probably know a little bit more about WebAssembly GC than I do. Like, I don't know what the GC stands for. But this is its own language inspired by TypeScript, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah. And the too long didn't read. WASM GC is it allows you to have WASM objects be garbage collected.
But now the caveat here, Xena is like not ready for prime time. But you can follow Justin on Blue Sky to get Xena updates, so you can see what he's working on. One of his latest updates is that he has LSP diagnostics in the editor with Xena, and they look like TypeScript diagnostics, so that's pretty cool.
I love this.
Yeah. So we'll have to watch Xena and see how it evolves, because I think this is super cool.
Yeah, this is pretty slick. I definitely think if you're listening, we want to have you on the show.
Okay, I got 2 other blog posts that are kind of cool for Cloudflare people. I'm on Cloudflare. They're building a CLI for all of Cloudflare. So like all their hundreds of features and hundreds of products or whatever. This is another long blog post you can kind of go into. I guess it's a 6-minute read. But basically what they say, this is kind of interesting though. Increasingly, agents are the primary customer of our APIs. Developers bring their coding agents to build and deploy applications, agents, and platforms to Cloudflare, configure their account, and query our APIs for analytics and logs. And we want to make every Cloudflare product available in all the ways agents need. For example, we now make Cloudflare's entire API available in a single code mode MCP server that uses less than 1,000 tokens. There's a lot more surface area to cover, though. CLI commands, workers bindings, including APIs for local development and testing, SDKs across multiple languages, our configuration file, Terraform, developer docs, API docs, and open API schemas, and agent skills. So lots and lots of stuff that they need to build tools around. And so this is a blog post that kind of goes into the old way of thinking, into what they're thinking about doing for their new stuff.
You know, what really makes me happy about, all of this agentic stuff, as like a silver lining, maybe if you're not like into it as much, is all of these tools are good for people too.
Yes.
Like getting a CLI for all of the things is just really good for people too.
Yes.
And then if you are needing to like sell your business right now, and if you need to, sprinkle on some AI to get them to bite, like, hey, we need a CLI, it's good for agents.
Yeah. So
let me work on this.
Let me put a pin in that for the Minnesota long by quick, because I do want to talk about that, because I have the same thought. The other blog post that Cloudflare announced is that sandboxes are generally available. Sandboxes, again, for agents, are a secure way for them to go do stuff. They basically have their own little mini computer in the cloud. So it's tied off from everything else. They're secure, quote unquote, secure, I'll say, and that the agent gets to do whatever it needs to do. It can use browser tools, it can use developer tools, all in its own sandbox, has its own file system, isolated from everything else. And you can programmatically spin them up and spin them down. And so that is now generally available. So I think that's a pretty cool blog post to go take a look at.
You could take the rails off of the agent and not wait for the interactive prompt.
Exactly.
Just let them rip.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about this, because this is the Minnesota long goodbye now, because I have the same thought, and it's really hard to articulate, and it might offend some people if you have a hot take on AI, which is fine. You should. It's fine to be skeptical. I totally understand. I think that AI and agents in this push is doing something that is really important, which is focusing people on the things that actually do matter, which is communication. So we were talking about this with our friend. If you are a developer who was good at communicating with individuals and teams, you probably find a lot more success with LLMs than other people do who are not as good at communicating. And this could be for, business communication, but also just like talking to people, because you do have to communicate a lot with these agents. Like, you're going to spend maybe not half your time, but a lot of your time writing up prompts and like context, for these agents to do stuff. But if you can do that, if you're able to make a plan with these things, and then the agents can take your plan and execute, they find a lot more success. But so does actual humans too. Like, you take the time to like explain something to your team member or whatever, or you document something, how to do this thing, is good for humans. But we're just so lazy that we never did that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But agents force you to do it because they are only successful if you do it, right? Whereas before, you could kind of like delegate it, or you could just like not really worry too much about it. Like, figure it out on your own, right? We kind of had that attitude. And so documentation would always fall by the wayside. Having proper CLIs that cover the entire API kind of was always a secondary thing. Because we had the first class way of doing stuff, which was, well, just code it, code it up.
Mm-hmm.
Because the code is the source of truth or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not as much, that's less context than what agents need to get stuff done. And so now what we're seeing is, again, this becomes like a forcing function to make us do stuff that we need to do that we didn't want to do before.
You just stepped on a neuron in like a good way that activated my brain. And that's, I strongly believe that documentation should only be written by humans. If you are writing documentation any other way,
Yeah.
I think it's a mistake.
Yeah.
Because there's no actual information there. There's no problem solving there.
Well, and that goes back to a fundamental first principles thing that I learned when I was doing consulting, which is one of the best things you can do as a consultant is to write every single day and publish every single day. And that's one of the things that my coach taught us, was how to be a daily publisher. And I did that for about 90 days straight when I was doing developer education consulting. And my blog is still public. Like, you can go and look and you can see every single post that I did. And you can also see how my thinking evolved, because there's a famous saying that goes, writing is thinking, right? So if you're thinking without writing, you're not thinking, right?
I have a good example of this. A mutual friend of ours told me about a person they work with that is writing not writing Jira tickets, but having the LLM write them. And they are just complete, they look like a Jira ticket.
Yes.
But they are complete nonsense.
Yep.
Like, they say the right things. They have the shape of a Jira ticket, but they have no context, no actual thinking about how to solve the problem in their specific system.
Right. Yep. And so what I've been finding in my experience these past few weeks, because I have been using Copilot and Claude pretty much every day to actually get stuff done, like as far as both like for my course, like this past couple days, I had it do the demos I needed for my course because I'm not a Python developer and I wanted to write a custom FastMCP client for my TypeScript code to test it. Okay. And so I looked at the docs, I looked at the examples. I'm like, this is great. This is pretty much exactly what I need, but I'm not a Python developer. Hey, Copilot, can you just read these docs and like figure out what I need to do to like build a FastMCP client to test this code? And sure enough, it did. And it did a great job. I mean, it works. And I'm able to like look at the code and understand it because I have to explain it. Like when I present it to the learner, I need to understand what it's doing. And so I can read through the code. Okay, I know this looks familiar to me. This is how you create an MCP client. I know what this code is doing. Here's how it works, right? But but it saved me so much time, and like I didn't know how to build that from scratch, right? So the blank page syndrome of like getting the MCP client out there, and then I could test it. And sure enough, it was able to run both the MCP server and the client because it's Python and TypeScript. Is able to run both of them at the same time to validate it, right? And it did that for me, which was great. And there was like a couple issues, again, that I had to like look at and be like, oh, well, I need to modify the server a little bit to make this output a little bit better. So like I fixed it, right? I found a bug with it because I could understand it, but it got me like 80% of the way there, right? So that's what I've been finding, is that I have to think more about the stuff that I want to build in order to have the agent do a good job at it. So I have to put more thought up front. That takes a little while, right? But once I do, I can make a plan with the agent and it can execute the plan. And that's the part that I don't necessarily want to do. Like, I want the strategic work of figuring out the plan and coming up with the plan, and also like refactoring and re-architecting. I want to handle those activities, but I don't necessarily need to be the one that's like shooting out code tokens in the editor, right? But at the same time, I don't want it to go too far, because when you have it build a whole huge thing, like then you're just going to be spending all your time getting your head around it. And so what do most people do when faced with that? They're just going to be like, this is too much for me to understand. I'm just going to trust, quote unquote, trust that the agent knew what it's doing, which you cannot do. You can't do that.
Yeah. I'll say it again, and I actually am considering now getting this tattooed on me. Computation is for computers. Problems are for people. And we've talked about this before. The hard part of building a product was never really the software. It's never usually the software. It's usually building the right product.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that you can't automate.
Yeah.
Like there is no way to build the right product automatically. That is an iterative process of trial and error.
Yes.
And critical thinking.
That's right. So we have not published this bonus video yet, but we have one in the wings because I did an illustrated diagram of like where I think that coding agents and stuff excel at in like the software engineering like landscape. Basically, I put it on top of a Wardley map to make it, because that's the way I tend to think. But it really solidified something in my mind, which is my heuristic now is basically like, if I need to understand it and learn it, I do it. I don't ask Claude to do it. I don't ask Copilot to do it. I do it so that I can learn it, because that's the human learning needs to happen in that at that point. Once I have learned something and I don't want to do it because it's either rote or procedural, or I don't have the time, but it's something that is low enough risk where it's not going to create too much of a problem, then I can delegate it to a coding agent. But then I also have to review it, because again, it goes back to the human learning aspect. So when you write the code, you are thinking about the code, right? So this goes back to writing is thinking. If you don't write the code, you're not thinking about the code, right? So there's a dichotomy here where, yes, you can ask the coding agent to write you code, but you have to realize that you're going to trade off not understanding what it wrote until you review it. And you might not even understand it until you run it through like a debugger and like are actively doing stuff. So that's why I purposefully and intentionally refactor the code myself, because that's the way that I'm going to learn it. Whatever the agent wrote is if I refactor it. Because if I ask the agent to refactor it, sure, it could probably do a faster job of it, but then I'm still not going to understand fully like what it did. So I do think that that's another reason why you want it to work in smaller slices, because that's easier to get your head around, because like we as humans have our own context window, right? And so if the agent one-shots an entire app, you're not going to get your head around all of it until it's too late, right? Until you deploy it or whatever.
Well, this goes right back around to communication too, where if you can accurately articulate what you want, either in a Jira ticket, to another human, to an agent, the likelihood that it'll be what you want at the end is much higher.
Much higher, yep. And so that's why one of the first steps that I do is to have it write a plan.md file. Like that's kind of the convention that I use. And I just keep one plan.md per branch, like that I work on. And like I review the plan. Do I review it word for word? No, not exactly. But I do look at the tasks that it set out, and I'm like, well, you don't have to do that part. Like, so I just delete it. Or, hey, you kind of got this wrong. Let me fix it up for you. And so I'll iterate it on it for a little bit. And then I'll be like, okay, plan looks good. Proceed, execute it. And like, it can keep track of itself. Like I have it, automatically do commits after each task. It does one task at a time. It validates each task before continuing, things like that, right? So it's a very sort of procedural type of implementation plan that it does. And I just, like I said, the outputs are pretty dang good. Like I've been really happy with it. It feels like I'm getting my $20 a month worth of extra development. So yeah. So I think that there is a way to work with these agents that can be productive, but you have to be very, very careful of understanding where you are in the software development lifecycle and like what is your role as a person so that you understand what's going on. And I don't think you can skip the planning, the reviewing, the acceptance testing. I don't think that you can delegate those to an LLM very effectively or at all, really.
It really does boil down to like, you can't automate thinking.
Yes.
Like that's solely still the domain of the human.
So I think I need to write more about this, because my little tagline on LinkedIn is how to work with AI without delegating your thinking, because this is something that I really believe can be done, and I feel like I am doing it. I'm still learning how to do it, but I should probably be sharing a little bit more about how I do that, just so I can refine my thinking more. So this is my opportunity on the podcast to talk about it. So that's helping me articulate it a little bit more. But yeah, I feel like that's a good place to leave it.
Yeah, I think so. And if you want to try and get your project greenlit at work, just sprinkle some AI on it.
Ain't that the truth?
That's like half a joke.
Just say we're making it agentic.
We're making it agentic.
Yep.
I really want to rewrite all this documentation because it'll be good for agents.
There you go. See, that's the thing. Use their own logic against them. That's right.
That's right. Yeah, if you want these managers to you want to speak the same language, okay? Capiche?
Yeah. Sorry, I feel like we were going to end right there, but I just wanted to mention there was like a Fortune article or something recently that there is like a dichotomy between executives and how they think about AI and management and how they think about AI. But I didn't read the article, so I'm not sure which way it went. But
we should add that to the show notes.
Yeah. So I'll have to link to it. But there was actually a bunch of articles that came out this week about like quiet quitting and like workers who are refusing to use AI, things like that. There were a lot of interesting things. Cool. All right. We'll leave that for further reading for the listener.
Yep. Your homework.
All right. Sweet.
All right. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to TypeScript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at Kamronicus.com and Eric is at EricOnerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at TypeScript.fm.